Hey guys, welcome to day 2 of our Renaissance and Reformation unit. Today we are taking this Renaissance north. So let's go ahead and jump right on into it. So, today's Renaissance, we're talking about it moving north. You already know that the Renaissance spirit was demonstrated in the works of Michelangelo, Da Vinci, and through many of the humanist writings. These ideas were impressive to scholars and students and merchants at the time who were trading and visiting in Italy. So by the late 1400s, Northern Europe had already been exposed to many of these Renaissance ideas. So how did it happen though? So geographically speaking, there were rivers and passes through the Northern Alps that physically allowed these ideas to move through or move into Northern Europe. But there's another important factor that helped these ideas move north as well, and that's the printing press. And so here's how it works. There is a mirror image of every letter, number, and symbol. It had to be carved into a small block of wood, like the ones that you see here in the picture. Years later, the entire block ends up being cast into metal. And so then these little blocks here, they're teeny tiny in this example here, but you can see that each one of these little teeny tiny blocks would end up being put into, it was cast in metal, and then they were laid out in order that it would need to be printed. But remember, it has to be a mirror image because the way the paper comes down. So if you look, you can see that this says the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. So I'm having a hard time reading it backwards, but that's what the mirror image of something is, okay? So once the blocks have been put together, they're in order the way it should be, then an oil-based ink is put over top of the blocks. A piece of paper would be laid down on top of it, and finally the paper would be pressed onto the blocks using a screw press. The guy who we have to thank for this, his name is Johannes Gutenberg. The first book that he printed on the printing press was the Bible, and so now that very first Bible that was printed there is called the Gutenberg Bible. One of the great things about this marvelous invention is that now printed items like books and newspapers and pamphlets, papers, anything on paper, it's able to be printed so much faster. And so before the printing press came along, though, there were scribes who hand wrote every single thing. So if I wrote a book and I wanted 10 copies of it published, I would take it to a scribe who would handwrite the book 10 times over, and that took a long time. Can you imagine how long it would take to do that? So now we have a machine that does the job. It's the same work, it's the same product coming out, but it's so much neater and it's quicker, and things can just get done a lot faster. So sorry, scribes, you are out of a job now. So as a result, we see that scribes we just don't need them anymore. So let's talk about some of our VIPs of the Northern Renaissance. This guy here is Albert Durer. He was German. He was a great painter and printer, but most importantly, he is known as for his work as an engraver. He was nicknamed the German Leonardo. Now, Durer had studied in Italy, and he had carried some of those Renaissance ideas that he was exposed to there back to Germany. He was very well known for his woodcuts and engravings like this one. So what he has done is he has taken a piece of wood and he has carved into it or engraved into it this scene here, which is supposed to be the Last Supper. This is in fact called the Last Supper. It's engraved by Doer. It's not very large. It's just a little taller than 15 inches and about 11 inches wide. So most of his works do portray religious scenes of the life of Christ as well as the apocalypse, but some of his other famous pieces include classical myths or realistic landscapes as well. Okay, this next guy is one of my favorites. This guy, Jan van Eyck. He is one of my favorite painters from the Renaissance time period. Van Eyck was from the Netherlands, specifically from a region called Flanders. Okay, and if you are from Flanders, then you are Flemish. So that's when it says Flemish painter, that means that he is from Flanders, which was part of the Netherlands. So Flanders ends up becoming the artistic center of Northern Europe during the Renaissance. He comes up with new ways to use oil paints. which were also new to the art world. And that what he does is he applies layer after layer after layer in order to create some very subtle variety in color, specifically in clothing and jewels in his paintings. His technique is still used today by artists. Now, this painting here, you have probably seen this painting before. This is the Arnolfini portrait. It is one of the most well-known paintings, and we will probably talk about it a little bit more in class. But anyway, as I was saying about the shading, if you look at her dress, let me point some of this out here. Right in here where you can see the folds of her dress. This is how you can see that by layering the paints, he's able to create these folds. The difference in color, it's still green, but it's just a matter of how many layers of paint was applied there to get that depth in the fabric. This is a great example of perspective as well, because you can see in the very, very back here, you can see that this is a mirror and that he has painted even within the mirror. So the mirror is on the back wall. It's painted smaller, whereas our people that are up here and even our little puppy dog down here, they are painted larger because it gives us that sense of perspective. All right. Darius Erasmus. Let's move on to some of the writers from this time period. So one thing you need to know about this guy, or about the Italian and the Northern Renaissances, is that Italian humanists were very interested in reviving the classical languages and texts. So when these ideas reach the North, these humanist ideas are taken and they're used to examine the teachings of the church, because you remember the church is still very important. People don't necessarily agree with it all the time, but it's still important to them. Northern humanists were critical of the Christian church in the hopes that it would inspire them to live a more Christian life. So now we have Christian humanism, and their goal was to reform society through education. So Darius Erasmus, he was a Christian humanist from Holland. He's best known for his book In Praise of Folly, where he makes fun of greedy merchants, heartsick lovers, scholars who like to argue, and priests who thought that they were above reproach, meaning that they didn't need to be corrected by anyone. Erasmus was actually a dedicated and devoted Christian who believed that Christianity was more about what was in your heart and not what Christian ceremonies or rules you followed. He thought that in order for society to improve, people needed to do a few things. First, most importantly, they needed to study the Bible. And when I say people needed to study the Bible, I mean all people, not just men, not just the rich, but that all people should study the Bible. So this is a big change for the people of the society, because it used to be that if you needed to know something about God or the church, then you went to your priest and you talked to your priest. You certainly didn't have a Bible in your own home that you would reference or go to read. Oh, there's our last one. Sorry about that. All right, Sir Thomas More. So Sir Thomas More and Erasmus, they were actually pretty close friends. Here he is. More was from England, and he wanted to portray a better model of society. So in 1516, he wrote a book called Utopia. Now, the Greek meaning of the word utopia is no place. So, I mean, there is no such place. But in the English language, it has come to mean an ideal place. And in Utopia, More describes an imaginary land where greed and corruption and war don't exist anymore. There was no private property. Everyone was educated. Everyone worked. There was no crime because the justice system worked. And no criminals, if there happened to be any, were put to death. It was a very complex and self-contained society, but communities shared a common culture and way of life. So while More wrote in Latin, his writings were actually translated into French, into German, into English, Spanish, and Italian. He was an English lawyer, a writer, and statesman, and later on he ends up becoming a judge and was a favorite of King Henry VIII, who we're going to talk about in one of our later videos. But More publicly disagreed and spoke out against the king wanting a divorce, so he was put to death by Henry VIII. And this is a drawing of what people think that Utopia looked like. It was an isolated island there. All right, on to our last guy for today, William Shakespeare. I'm pretty sure you have heard of him. At least you all should have heard of him by now. He was born in 1564, and by 1592 he was living in London, writing poems and plays and performing at the Globe Theatre. He is undoubtedly one of the most famous writers of the Elizabethan age. He was an English writer. Makes sense. He was born in England. So he's an English writer. He becomes a master at taking popular short stories at the time and turning them into plays. And so some of his most well-known ones are Hamlet and Macbeth, and Romeo and Juliet, Taming of the Shrew, just to name a few of them. Do any of you guys, have you ever seen 10 Things I Hate About You? If you did, and if you liked it, then what you actually liked watching was an adaptation of Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew. He's also known for writing sonnets, which, in case you don't remember, are poems with 14 lines in them. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for today. You should have gotten notes for all of this. Next class, we are going to get a little bit deeper into these sorts of things. Okay, see you later. Bye.